You're listening to the Devil Dog Talk Show.
This show contains explicit material and is recommended for ages 18 and older for mature audiences only. But hey, it's the internet.
All right, everybody. So welcome to the Devil Dog Talk Show. Today we have Madison Margolin. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Margolin.
Cool. Nailed it. And she has been on the show before when you guys launched the Double Blind magazine. And today we're going to be discussing a bit more with Madison about a wonderful journey that she took creating this book. And let me just go ahead and pull it up. It's called Exile and Ecstasy. That is a real interesting title there. And it has a continuation of growing up with Ram Dass and coming of the age in the Jewish psychedelic underground, which is a lot. That's a lot to digest. So if I could ask you just a few questions about your book first and the title, Exile and Ecstasy, how did your journey for this book begin?
Yeah, I grew up in the psychedelic space. My dad's old friends with Ram Dass. He's a criminal defense lawyer. He also defended Timothy Leary. He and Ram Dass had the same guru. And so I grew up with all these people who had psychedelic experiences, who kind of integrated them through spiritual practice. And then as a journalist in journalism school, I kind of fell in with the Hasidic community. I was given the assignment to report on that particular ethnic group because every kid had to report on a different ethnicity. And I met people on the fringes of Hasidic society who were doing a lot of psychedelics. And it turned out that they seemed very similar in spirit and soul to the people I grew up with. So I knew that there was a book in there. I knew there was a story in there, a personal story, whatever. I started, writing about this 10 years ago, collecting my interviews, collecting the things that I had written. One thing led to another. I got a book agent. I got a book deal. I started compiling that all together based on stories I'd already published and stuff that I hadn't published. Worked on that. Here we are with the book.
That's so awesome. And it's an amazing journey because the conversation that we've had before, of course, with the Double Blind, was centric on psychedelics. Of course, that's what the main genre is, right? And keying into the whole Hasidic Jews society or community, how did that really bridge? Because for a lot of people, I am not familiar. I grew up in California. Yes, there's plenty of Jewish people out here, but not many Hasidic Jews. You don't really see that out here. And what was it like? You said that you found a fringe community within that group. How did that happen? And where would this kind of lead one to understand how is it tied into the religion, or is it tied into personal experiences, or how does that really bridge?
Yes. Sorry, can you, as the psychedelic piece tied into?
Yeah. How does the psychedelic piece and the Jewish piece tie in? Yeah.
Yeah. When you're coming from a community that's so, where there's a very strong spiritual orientation and there's God is a focal point, it kind of primes you differently for psychedelic experience. And so I wanted to understand how people who are coming from strong religious backgrounds, how the religion influenced the psychedelic experience. Can you have a overlapping Jewish and psychedelic trip?
Right.
And so, and I would say that there is a lot of overlap in that a lot of Judaism already is about kind of altering our consciousness and getting into states that prioritize the soul and embodied experience. And, we have the language and the framework through the religion to conceive of, spiritual connection in a way that I think secular frameworks don't necessarily make front and center in the same way. I guess the question is I've seen it a lot in these Jewish psychedelic spaces, framing the experience as a prayer or being able to integrate the psychedelic experience with Jewish practice and rituals in a way where the religion itself becomes the set and setting for the psychedelic experience.
Oh, wow. That is something very intriguing to me because I'm a very, I wouldn't even say religious. I'm a very faithful person. Okay, like that tying into spiritualism and faith, and the whole realms of what you can get into with Gnosticism, and all the beautiful things out there, right? And to see that there is a bridge within the Jewish community in psychedelics was very profoundly interesting to me. Even though we've had our conversation, the way you go into this book, and the way you even the way you list your parts out are really, really hitting hard to me. And the way you have the exile, the ecstasy, the integration, and then the home part, right? That's the most important part, is we want to use something to get to that place of peace, right? And I think fundamentally most people that are psychonauts or journeyists into that realm of theology or experience, I think it's very interesting. So when you when you get into these groups, is it very closed off, or because you are of Jewish descent and faith, that you are able to have those relationships with these type of people? And is it very open, or is this something that your book, we're glazing over the topics, or we're covering a little, or is this really like, hey, no, like this is how people integrate and actually find whatever it is they're looking for to come home to a base?
Yeah. It wasn't like so easy in the beginning getting access to the Hasidic world. It's a very insular religious community. And even if you're Jewish, like if you're not from that world, it's not necessarily like, doesn't really matter if you're, Jewish. So yeah, I kept, I made friends with people who were sort of on the fringes of that community, who were sort of negotiating their relationship to religion, to their families, to themselves, to God, right? And it was easier for me to connect with them, especially because they're not as religious. And so, for them to talk to someone like me who was coming from a less, from a non-Hasidic background, it was already, I got access that way. But, upon meeting them, I realized I'm like, oh, like these are people I want to like actually be friends with. Like I feel some sort of kinship with them. I feel like, I feel some sort of, like communal spirit. And so, I guess, to answer your question is like, I kept getting invited back. Like people kept inviting me to Shabbat or holidays or just different events. And I realized like as a practicing Jew myself, like this actually kind of fit. Like it felt like a form of religion that I could get on board with.
The way that psychedelics are currently, right? Federal regulation, of course, the special interest groups right now within veteran communities. I see a lot more often than not the conversation of legalization of certain psychedelic modalities for treatment, like ibogaine, ketamine, psilocybin mushrooms, DMT, all of these type of different psychedelic modalities. Where do you see your piece in this journey with the book kind of carrying that thought forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really, you see like the legalization of psychedelics in pharmaceuticalized contexts. You're seeing decriminalization measures, you're seeing policy change, et cetera, et cetera. It just I really want to hold space for the spiritual component of psychedelics. And I think my book really puts that on display. There are a few examples of like churches forming or people who are getting some sort of religious exemption in order to do this safely with protection from legal enforcement. So, it's interesting for me because I grew up I grew up with the psychedelic underground, and I say that both from my childhood and also from my early reporting. And so it's a little trippy for me to see things become so above ground at this point in my life. I mean, I'm into it. I'm glad that it's happening, but I'm still sort of asking myself, like, where is the culture going? And especially as psychedelics become more mainstream, I've made it sort of my little tagline to say, like, why can't we make the mainstream more psychedelic? Like, how can we actually apply the ethos and the values of these substances in a way that is, actually hopefully going to affect, systemic change.
That's a very good interpretation, because it really is something that I would love to see, is that systemic shift of stuff, right? All the pains and everything we see in the world right now, and to keep it evergreen in the conversation, there's always going to be war. There's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be tribal isolation, right? And even with politics, okay? And no matter what we do, it seems to be sometimes falling on deaf ears. And I go, but with your book and the way that you've interpreted it and laid it out, right? One of the key takeaways that I really like was the home at the end of the rainbow, the whole concept, right? We're going through life, and I just had this conversation with my wife, and without trying to cry, okay, because we just had a great Thanksgiving. There's a tremendous amount of value and, I believe, spirit in the world that you can connect with and have that profound emotional experience, even without psychedelics, right? You can have, like you were saying, you get re-invited in, you're going to these Jewish traditional things that really connect you, right? And I go, yeah, that's kind of the get me point for it. And to keep it that way, I do feel a little, nervous about, because look at what happened with cannabis, right? It's gotten hyperpolarized in the, I want to say, entrepreneurial, mental space, right? And to see something like, something as sacred as mushrooms, or, peyote, which is Native American, traditional psychedelic, right? They have these experiences that guided them through journeys, right? And we have these experiences guiding us through journeys. And then we have individuals like yourself, journalists and authors that pointing history, big anchor points in history. When you bring up, your father's work in the legal apparatus and how that breaks down, when you bring up Hasidic Jews, when you bring up the history of psychedelics, it's just a very great sensation to see that somebody that has that light bearing, you're kind of walking down that path, and you're leading a bigger group of people than I think you might give yourself knowledge to, that you can really say, hey, this is something that we really need to focus to keeping in. We got to keep that religious aspects, even if it's separate, right? And you're practicing your thing, I'm practicing my thing, but together we're all like, hey, yeah, this is awesome, right? This is the awesome sauce. I think it's a beautiful thing. So when you wrote that last chapter, I'm sorry, it's the second to last chapter, what was your mindset going into that?
And into the chapter and into the home at the end of the rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that's really the point of the book. The book, I think it really ties everything together. And there's a lot of different ways that I look at it. First of all, there's this quote by Ram Dass, we're all just walking each other home, which, maybe he meant in regard to when you die, your soul goes back home to God in heaven or whatever it is, right? But I feel like, when the whole metaphor of tripping, of journeying, of doing psychedelics is, what are you doing? You're leaving home of mundane consciousness and going somewhere else, like mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. And it's a process, it's a journey of coming home to yourself in a way that is maybe more embodied or conscious or spiritually kindled than you were before. You're bringing back souvenirs from the psychedelic space and consciousness in itself. Then the question is what do you do with that? So what? How do you, and so that's what Rainbow Gathering is for me. That's what it's about. And, when I first went to Rainbow Gathering, it was it's a trip unto itself. It's a total paradigm shift being there. You're in a temporary society built in nature. There's no money. The culture is really about who are you as a person? What's your what are your character traits that enable you to give back and serve the society? It's not a festival where you go and watch a bunch of shows and you're just there for fun. Definitely Rainbow is fun, but it's really more of a learning experience and a practice in building community and building conscious community and intentional community and putting the psychedelic ethos into practice and application. And so, and the people I've met through Rainbow, not just Rainbow, the gatherings, but the community at large have all just been my soul family. I didn't realize people I was connecting with had roots in the culture of the Rainbow gatherings that I was oh, that's what I'm connecting to in you. And so I found this very yeah, like this tribe, I was like, oh, like this really fits, like this is like kind of spirit family. And especially the Jewish cohort of the rainbows, I realized was like very much something I was clicking with. Before I even had gone to Rainbow, I didn't realize I was into Rainbow, just because the people I was hanging out with had all been really influenced by it. And again, it's about, having a relationship with nature, showing up for yourself and for community, and like really, asking yourself, like, how do you make psychedelics real in regular life?
That's crazy. Like, I'm just trying to think of it. How do you apply psychedelics in regular life? Like, that's, I think, something that a lot of people are trying to incorporate. I know plenty of fellas and young ladies that do the microdosing nowadays. I think it's getting more mainstream. You bring up LSD a bit in your book, and I'm like, it's pretty heavy stuff. What type of work do you have to prepare for when you go on to such a journey like this? Like prepared. I mean, like, one, you're a journalist in this space, right? Which is, I mean, it's going to be an interesting subject matter. And then two, you have that connection of Judaism, right? Jewish belief and faith and practice. How does that incorporate? It just doesn't seem like those two things would marry up too well. Kind of like Mexicans. I'm Mexican. And if you said, "Ma, I'm going to go smoke a joint," they'd be like, "What? I wait." And like, you're getting hit with the chancla. You know what I mean? So I could just imagine what it would be like for the Jewish community. Is this something that the Jewish community wants as a whole? Or is it, just like you said at the beginning, a fringe part of it that really finds a deeper connection to that higher religious self through psychedelics?
Yeah, it's a fringe thing, but I would say it's a fringe thing that's getting to the core of what Judaism is about. And I think so much of Judaism has been lost and pushed, like kind of just has become a shell of itself, just because there's been so much persecution, even, in Europe back in the day, like the trippier, more embodied, witchy practices or whatever, shamanistic practices, I'll say, were put underground, or just people were not practicing them in order to like make Judaism look more like a regular European Christian religion. While there were witch hunts happening and Jew hunts and all sorts of things, pogroms. So, the Judaism that we're left with today is like really a product of a lot of trauma and suppression and disembodiment and forgetting, like, a rabbi recently who I did in a book event said this, he has this term, his name is Peretz Mochkin. He used the term like spiritually indigenous. And, I think sometimes we forget what we're accessing, we're just like going through the motions without the same depth of meaning that they're meant to kind of bring out. So I, as much as combining Jewish practice, singing Jewish songs as medicine music and ayahuasca ceremonies, or having like a Psytrance festival over Shabbat and whatever, like as much as combining Jewish practice with psychedelics is a fringe thing, I also think that it's getting to the heart of what Judaism is about in a way that I hope would really reignite our spiritual connection for this generation, those to follow, while also like targeting patterns of trauma, both in lived experience and ancestrally, that need to be need to be put to an end.
Yeah.
Continue the patterns that we're subject to already.
That's a very profound, and it comes to an introspection where you, as the individual who's lived this life, okay, you get a right on such a, I don't want to say it's a sensitive subject, but we all know anytime you bring up the Jewish community, it's a sensitive subject, okay? Can't get away with it. It's going to be in the news every day until things are resolved, okay? And we could look at all of those introspections on the left, the right, the political left and right, or we could look at the religious perspectives. I am Catholic, and, I would agree with you tremendously, not just within, religions themselves, but churches, okay, individually are more fractional to what they used to be in the sense of spiritualism. bringing in the psychedelic aspect of Judaism for you personally, though, is it something of high stress where you're like, hey, am I going to be judged by, or, is this a community issue where there's a lot of, I don't want to say negative think, but negative pushback? Is there any of that, or is this a well-accepted type approach to, again, bringing a new vision of, or reigniting, kindling that spiritualism?
Thank God there really hasn't been a lot of pushback. I mean, it's still fringe, and so like the people who are into it are really into it, and then the people who aren't don't know about it. So it's kind of, it's like that. Yeah. I think there's some concerns among people who are more orthodox about, like, for instance, like ayahuasca being connected to other traditions that maybe are not Jewish, obviously, where there's like different gods involved and, different deities and animism and stuff that's like not specifically like spiritually kosher, I guess, with Judaism, because there's this, Judaism is a very theistic religion, obviously, and there's one God. And the fact that certain medicines have been associated with religions where there's a more animistic view of the divine, that can be seen as a little controversial. Okay. But that's like, I wouldn't say that I personally, and me personally, and also people in the community who are doing ayahuasca and whatever, like, it's not a problem. Like, it's not like you do a medicine that, okay, sure, is being used by another indigenous culture with a different religion. Like, it's not like that makes you of that religion. It's just like, I think of it as a lubricant for prayer and, just connecting to like the one source.
That's interesting. So in the Judaism, is it Judaism? Judaism? How do you pronounce that? I can't, it's just all over the word. In the belief of Judaism, right? Is it common to utilize, I would say, any external modalities, like, medicines, or, I'm so unfamiliar that I think, okay, Amish, right? I'm like, they don't do anything, and then you have Jehovah's Witness, no blood transfusions, no windows in the churches. Like, everybody has their own interesting little things. Is this one of those things that maybe was a thing back in the day, and then, as the church grew and grew, it just kind of left it in its, I guess, dust in a way to speak? And how does that come about?
Yeah, I mean, entheogens, i.e. substances that elicit a spiritual experience, have always been part of Jewish practice, and I would say the practice of any culture or religion on this planet. For instance, Judaism has a very strong tradition around wine. We use wine all the time as a sacrament, and we have Passover. A Passover Seder is basically a wine ceremony where you come up and drink multiple cups of wine throughout the night. I mean, funny, it's like ayahuasca. You also come up and drink multiple cups of something throughout the night, So, and who knows what was actually in the wine of yesteryear, what other ingredients were in there that maybe made it more trippy than it is now. There's also other examples where, like, the Jews or the Hebrew tribe learned acacia extraction technology from the Egyptians. And acacia is a shrub that's native to the Middle East and contains DMT. And there's, people like to joke that, like, DMT, when Moses saw the burning bush, it was actually like an acacia bush, and he was tripping on DMT. And there's also examples from actual Jewish practice in biblical times. For instance, on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year, the high priest would put himself into a chamber, basically hotbox himself in this small chamber filled with the smoke of this very holy entheogenic incense. And the incense was said to be burning on acacia coals. And he would go into this chamber, hotbox it, and pray on behalf of the Jewish people on the holiest day of the year of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. So there's a lot of instances where, where entheogenic substances are incorporated into ritual and practice. And it's not seen as like this woo woo, like, it's just, it's natural. It's part of life. Like, that's the thing, is it's like, it's actually just a very unnatural modern invention that, entheogens are so stigmatized.
Wow. That is actually a great way of looking at it, because you hit it so perfectly. And that's what I love when I talk to people like yourself. It's just all these things and thoughts that I could possibly come up with. Like, oh no, because it's super bad, or it might make you trip balls. And it's like, duh, dude, that's what it does. Like, I didn't know what a theogen was for half this conversation. And I'm always learning, which is great. So developing something like Exile and Ecstasy, okay, with this background that you've had tremendously into, both the drug culture, Jewish culture, as a person individually, now discussing this, what is it like to, I guess, reflect back on this very great history and knowledge that you've obtained through writing this book?
Yeah, what's it like? What's it like to look back on everything that I've learned through writing the book?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just trying to live the life, meaning to say, like, it's like, okay, like I asked in the introduction, like, I'm using myself as a character to see if any of this stuff actually works, right? Like how can the spiritual practices and psychedelic consciousness and other mindfulness modalities and whatever actually help us feel whole and well, and get through life in a way where we're better at the end of the day. And so, what I've learned is just, it's almost like a learning through experience. It's not so much like, okay, now I've gathered this information, I wrote an academic treatise and next project, but it's like, I'm still learning. Like it's really, when people, it's like yoga. You don't say, oh, I learned yoga, I know yoga now. Like you do it every day, or however often is in the practice. It's a practice that lasts your entire life. And I also see, people say I'm a practicing Jew. It doesn't mean I learned Judaism. Like, no, like you're practicing it. You're a practicing Hindu, you're a practicing Catholic, like whatever it is. Like, there's no such thing as mastering it, unless you're like one of like Vedas who is written about in religious texts, and even they're just human too. So so that's, it's just really more, I'm like learning to practice, and I'm refining my practice.
That is beautiful and humbling at the same time. Like, just talking to another person that feels that the whole point of it is to continue it. Just keep practicing it. There's no, we got it right. There's no, it's perfect. This thing is called life for a reason. It's not called perfect. Okay. And I love how you approach that conversation so elegantly, because if you look at it as a historical sense, one, being a young lady, a young woman like yourself, and then two, Jewish. Okay. And then three, hey, we're talking about some really trippy stuff called psychedelics, like mashing all that in to this wonderful journey called Madison Margolin, right? And this book, it's just something beautiful that I think, of course, I'm going to be rereading it because as I continue, I'm like, hey, I found that interesting, or, hey, I have a nice little trip or a nice little experience of some, prayer or whatever it may be. Like, what is this integration? Like, how do you integrate these journeys that you've learned on, and what it, like you said it very perfectly a little bit ago, these are the little souvenirs that we're taking from our journeys and our trips, and we're trying to integrate back into our lives. So with Exile and Ecstasy, do you believe that the readers will be able to see that as a whole? And then, I'm not saying, hey, this is going to be, somebody's, but next to the next Bible, but definitely something where, hey, I had some questions about stuff. I'm Jewish. I feel this way too. And do you feel like this is going to be a great takeaway for our readers there?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope anyone who's on a spiritual or psychedelic path or religious path will find some sort of resonance with the book. Like, I don't think you need to be Jewish to appreciate it. I don't think you need to necessarily be a fan of Ram Dass, though might help. I don't think you have to have had psychedelic experiences, though also it might help. But there's different like intersectional points with which to like engage with the subject matter. And, I guess, yeah, trying to pinpoint the point of the the root of the question here. But I think that it's really about like interrogating like what is psychedelic and spiritual consciousness and experience, and like how do we live lives that reflect that. And so I always, it's like the real I don't like the word success. I don't know if it's quite the word, but like the litmus test for like, is this shit working, is like, what does your life look like in between ceremonies? Like, what does your life look like in between trips, or what does it look like in between different holidays, or during the weekdays instead of on Shabbat? Like, is life, are you well? Are you whole? Are you eating healthy food? Are you breathing? Are you moving your body? Are you having positive relationships? Do you feel like that you're spiritually connected, that you're held by the universe? Like, it's just, how do we move through the day, I think, is really the point of all of this.
That is amazing, because not to be weird, but in a weird resonant way, that is exactly what my wife and I were just talking about this morning. We had this wonderful experience with the holidays. We had this great experience with our children going to robotics class, or a tournament for Roblox, right? And I have the hardest time, you said success. With success and with validation, self-interpretation, self-gratification, self-value, I am the worst. And I was telling her, I was like, I don't know what it is, but I get more fearful. I have more panic attacks when things are going well. And I tend to not take care of myself when things are going well, because I'm so enthralled with the negative mentality that I have of fear. And I don't know what it is. I hate it. I hate it so bad. And she goes, you know what? You're doing good. And that's what you need to focus on. Make those steps. Like you're saying, what's the shit? Are we getting better between the next steps? Are we making a finer sense of progress? Are we practicing breathing? Like, I mean, let's be honest. You say that, but I don't think people, and I know our listeners and people that follow you already will understand that. But in general, as a society of human beings on this planet, remember to take a deep breath every now and again, or practice that. Life gets difficult. It gets a lot more difficult when you stop breathing, right? And I love that, because you're saying it in a way where, hey, it's like yoga. We're practicing every day. Like for me, it was wrestling. If you're not on the mat and you're not moving your body, don't expect to win. That's just this way it is. So to wrap it up in a sense, I really just want to focus in on the book promotion of itself, and a shout out for anybody or anything that helped you get to where you're at today.
So a shout out to anyone who helped you get to, okay. Yeah. First of all, Zoe Wilder, number one. She's just been the most amazing publicist and friend and colleague. And Zoe and Mike, actually, they work together, and it's like the whole publicity company is Zoe Wilder, but it's both Zoe and Mike behind the scenes. They're doing everything. Nice. So I want to say Zoe. I want to say thank you to my editor, Eden Pearlstein, who is just like the most brilliant creative genius I've ever met. And has really helped me grow as a writer and as a thinker and as a person. My literary agent, Charles Kim, Friedman Kim, he just got married. So he's also just, sees talent and sees, has like a refinement of sight that he's able to like see a good story and to help people develop it and bring it to the world. So I just want to give those three shout outs. And sorry, what was the other part of the question again?
Anything you'd like to add before we wrap, because we're wrapping up clearly, right?
Yeah. Just, I don't want people to like read the book and come away with like, okay, I need to be doing more psychedelics. Like, it's really about like, how can I live a life that is psychedelic? Like, let's take psychedelic out of like the noun and turn it into an adjective. And maybe the adjective is like derived from the substances themselves, but really like, make, living by the values, living by the ethos, living according to what they open us up to. And can we live with that openness and open-heartedness and sense of self and awareness and consciousness and connection to God? And so in a way where like the climate of being is psychedelic, almost so that we don't even need them as substances themselves. Like that would be the goal, right? Like, it's not about like having to like run to these high experiences. Yes, it's fun. Yes, it could be therapeutic. Yes, it could be whatever. But it's like the actual point is like the moment, like is the day to day, like is the how are we able to like show up and like serve God or serve the world around us.
That is amazing. I honestly always enjoy these kind of conversations because I have a great deepest sense of fear of that type of lifestyle, like living openly, right? Who does that? I don't know many people that do, but that's a great way of painting this beautiful picture of living psychedelically. Wow. I am taken aback as again, like last time. I'm always going to probably reflect back for the next week or two as I edit this and just be like, wow, just what a pleasure this was. Just learning more about you as a person, but you as an author, learning more about this book today. And of course, about Exile and Ecstasy. And the many chapters of how you progress this book in its parts it's just interesting. And so I'm going to be able to walk away with this and just key into a bunch of different things, of course, with my friends, my family, without even having a psychedelic experience like you're saying, but to actually, hey, we were just talking about this morning. I'm going to look back and say, hey, look at this chapter. Okay. And she's probably going to laugh. And that's that's the beautiful thing about making a connection and reading some good books and getting some great material out there into the world. And I'm just so grateful for your time today. And again, thank you for being on the Devil Doc Talk Show, Madison Margolin. And her wonderful book is called Exile and Ecstasy, Growing Up with Ram Dass and Coming of Age in the Jewish Psychedelic Underground, which is heavy. Like, I mean, I'm really trying to think about it. Like, how interesting is it now that everything is coming above ground, like you were saying? So exciting.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show and just seeing the book. You actually asked me about my favorite part of the book, which is the home at the end of the rainbow. So it just makes me realize that you internalized it in a way that is exactly how I wanted it to be internalized. So, so thank you. And just, for being supportive all these years, both when I was on doing Double Blind and now this book and everything else.
Awesome. I'm here for you anytime. Anytime you want to jump on the line and share with our listeners or even with myself. Like I said, it's just a great day to have wonderful conversations like this. And I very, very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Internet. Hello. Asisten idag ösnen på förstående ni ska jag finna mig representera och resna bestämt ska jag snälla shit.
Well, I didn't need to sit.